Okay, I don't remember anymore what the title of the talk is, but I know what I want to talk about. I think it's about the cognitive Big Bang,
Yeah.
um, which is a term I'm going to define after I tell you a few stories. And so I'll divide the talk in two parts. The first part, I'll tell you several stories from Aboriginal myths from pre-literate cultures from across the world. And then that will have nothing to do, apparently, with any cognitive Big Bang. I'll just tell you these stories, maybe 4 or 5 of them. And then in the second part, I'll start from scratch and I'll tell you something completely else. And then I'll try to tie those two things together at the end. Okay? So it will look like I'm giving you two completely different talks, but that's not the case. I'll tie them up at the end. And hopefully I'll do all of this in half an hour, so we have half an hour to interact. Okay. There are so-called creation myths across cultures in the world that are fascinating. And we just don't hear more about them because our culture today, Western culture, which now permeates the entire globe, tends to put down anything that has this label myth. We have come to associate myth with lie, untruth. Maybe not an outright lie, but something that isn't really true. It's just a story, a grandmother's story for children. And that's why we miss out on the richness of these creation myths from across the globe. So I want to tell you maybe 4, maybe 5 of these myths from pre-literate cultures. And the idea is to highlight, I hope you sense the ways in which these myths are actually trying to say the same thing, using completely different imagery. Okay? So let me tell you the first one. Where do I start from? I'll start from the creation myth of the Arundan people in Australia. It's an Aboriginal group from Australia. And it's one of the myths from the so-called dream time of Australian Aboriginals. You might have heard about it. And the idea is that a deity creates the world in the form of a dream. A deity dreams the world up into existence. And this particular myth of the Arundan entails that the creator deity, called Karora, was asleep, buried in the ground, asleep in the ground, and then a tree grew from his head, pierced the surface of the ground, and went all the way to the sky, rooted on his head. It's a symbol for connecting the grounded, solid world of thinking with something transcendent, right? And once that link was established, and now I'm already interpreting the myth, Karora began to dream the world up into existence. And the figures of his dreams became real as he was dreaming them up. For instance, animals would pop out of his belly button. Man would pop out of his armpits and would populate the world he was dreaming up. And then at some point the sun would rise and Karora would wake up and rise from the ground. But the interesting thing was that he would wake up within his dream. He would wake up and meet the animals that popped out of his belly button, the human beings that came out of his armpits, and he would be subject to the constraints of the dream. In other words, by waking up within his own dream, he would lose the magical power of creation, and he would be constrained within his own creation, unable to change it at a fundamental level. The myth goes on to say that he would even be hungry once he woke up, and he would have to hunt down the animals that he created and cook them and eat them because he would be hungry. And then he would fall asleep again, and he would dream again, and more things would pop into existence because as he was dreaming, he had the magical powers of creation. And then he would wake up within the dream and lose those magical powers, and so on and so forth. And notice that the myth is appealing to two states of consciousness that are very clearly distinguishable. One is the dream state, in which you have absolute freedom to create. You are not self-reflective in that state. You are not thinking about your thoughts. You don't know that you are experiencing. You're just experiencing. You're flowing with the Tao, to use the Chinese mythological language. You are not self-reflective. You do not have meta-cognitive capacities. And because of that, because you're not thinking about your own thoughts, everything is possible. because you do not know what is impossible, what is supposed to be impossible. If you're not self-reflective, you just dream things up. You're not critical. You're not telling yourself, oh, this is not supposed to happen, or this discontinuity in the timeline is not supposed to happen, or this is supposed to be impossible. You don't know that. But once he wakes up, he becomes self-reflective, but then he loses his magical powers, because now he knows what is supposed to be impossible, and he becomes subject to that new constraint that he himself dreamed up. Two states of consciousness: magical, non-metacognitive state in which creation is open, and another state in which you wake up within your own dream. I'm speaking as Karora now. You wake up within your own dream, you become lucid, but you lose your magical powers. At the same time, that lucidity fixes the dream into existence. It makes the dream solid, substantial, concrete, as opposed to a evanescent illusion that comes and flows out of your control. Yeah? Keep this in mind. And then, the other side of the globe, maybe thousands of years difference, in at least hundreds of years difference in time. There is a tribe in the Amazon that probably is familiar to some of you because of a book by Terence McKenna called True Hallucinations, the Witoto tribe. Anybody heard of it? You guys are, except for James, you guys are disappointing me as a psychedelic community. I'm not kidding. So there is this Witoto tribe in the Amazon, and they have a mind-bending myth. According to the myth, their creation deity, called Nainema, also dreamed the world up into existence, but in phases. The world began as a very evanescent illusion in Nainema's mind. You know, sometimes when you're in a trance, you have an experience, there's a storyline, there is an insight, and you can't really, if you try to put your finger on it, it slips away. You can't pin it down. It's very slippery. So that's what the myth tries to evoke. It was this very slippery illusion. But Nainema wanted to get hold of it, so he tied it by the thread of a dream. Now don't ask me to explain this, I'm just telling you what the myth is. Nainema tied his illusion by the thread of a dream. And then he glued the thread with magical glue. The image that comes in my mind is like a dog that's trying to run away, and he puts a collar on the dog and holds ties the dog up so the dog doesn't run away. So he's trying to hold on to that illusion and make it fixed, more concrete, more solid, as part of his creative process. Once he tied it up and glued the thread, he started stamping on the illusion that's now under control, started stamping on it until he broke through and he entered the dream. He entered his own dream. The echo with the Aboriginal myth from Australia is very clear. Again, a creation deity, a creator deity, dreams the world up into existence and then tries to enter his own dream. And once Nainema entered the dream, he sat on the earth and then he spat on the ground and the forest came into existence out of his saliva. That's the Witoto dream. It's incredibly nuanced and sophisticated for a preliterate culture. I mean, clearly these cultures did not compose these myths by steps of reasoning. The sophistication involved here is just too great. They sensed it. These myths were sensed like you sense a landscape, like you perceive something without composing it through steps. You just sense it. These guys were connected with a part of mind that we lost contact with because of our conceptual thinking. Our critical self-reflection is too overwhelming. They were connected with what Jung would have called the unconscious, which I think is a misnomer. It's not unconscious, it's just non-self-reflective consciousness. But be it as it may. There's another myth, and that's a Hindu myth. That one you probably have heard about. There are many versions of this myth. I'll tell you one, but they are all similar in essence. It's about the Brahman, the creative principle behind all existence. And the myth goes as follows. In the beginning, Brahman created primordial waters. I interpret that as an allusion to the framework of creation, like space-time, the space-time framework. He created a space where he would then put things through the word, right? These are the primordial waters, an amorphous something that created the space of creation itself that he would then populate. And then out of his seed, out of Brahman's seed, which is code for sperm, it allowed his seed to drop into the primordial waters, and out of that came a cosmic egg, which is a perennial theme in many myths across the world, the idea of a cosmic egg. And then Brahman himself hatched from that egg. So he achieved self-generation. It's a recursive process. He created himself within the scaffolding of his creation, within the primordial waters. In other words, he entered his dream. Again, the same idea of a deity dreaming the world up into existence and then entering his dream. In the first myth, it was by waking up in his dream. In the second myth, it was by stamping on it until he broke through. In this myth, it's by hatching inside his own dream. And then he utters the word, and he populates the world with its contents. We don't need to go very far for all this. The Christian myth that many of us have grown up with. In the Christian myth, the word, which is a translation in English for a word in Greek that also means thought and reasoning, the logos. Logos also means thought and reasoning, not only the word. We translated it as the word. But according to the Gospel of John, the world was created through the word, through thought, through mental activity. And then the word entered the world by being born into it as the Christ. And Christ is not only Son of God, He's God Himself. That's the Christian dogma. That each member of the Trinity is fully God. It's not a part of God. Each member of the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, is fully God. So God, in its fullness, has entered his or her or its own creation in the form of the Christ after the utterance of the Word, after the expression of thought. This is really agnostic gospel, the Gospel of John. It's a miracle it was allowed in the Bible all those years ago. But anyway, and there are many other instances of this. The Corpus Hermeticum talks about God as mind. Mind is Father God. Through mind, all things were created. And mind manifests in and through all things. This is a direct quote from the Corpus Hermeticum. So, the takeaway messages from this is a couple of key points. One is, the world is a mental creation. Two, the mind that created it entered its own creation and subjected itself to the constraints of that creation. And three, that process of entering its own dream, its own imagination, is a singularity, is a singular moment that doesn't really have a rational, linear explanation. You can see that in the myth of Brahman, who achieved self-generation by hatching within his own imagination. It's very difficult to make linear, logical sense of this. It's a singularity. Okay, now pause, and now something completely else for another 10, 15 minutes. And then I'll try to tie it up with what I just said. Okay? That's the game I want to play. Forget about the myths. Connect with your own experience now. I'll try to help you by appealing to your own experience. Try not to stay at a conceptual level with what I'm about to say. That's why I'm not using slides at all today. Try to connect with your own direct experience as I try to evoke it, as opposed to staying at the level of words and concepts and logical steps. All right? Let's think about time and what time is. Time is past, present, and future. So let's start from the beginning. Let's start with the past. What is the past? According to your direct experience. Don't give me theories, don't give me relativity, don't give me block universe, don't give me any of that. Stay with your own experience. In which we take certain qualities of our present experience and we project them onto an objective timeline from past to present to future. It's a cognitive trick that lends all the substantiality, the concreteness, the bulk of the world, of life itself. If you were able to deactivate this trick, which is instinctive and which we all do all the time, in other words, now, existence would poof out. You would see it for what it is, the great void of Buddhism. We create substance out of nothing through a trick of cognition. And that's what I call the cognitive Big Bang. It is a Big Bang, it is an explosion, but it's not an explosion 13.7 billion years ago. It's not an explosion of matter in an empty framework of space-time. It's not even an explosion that created space-time. It's not something that preceded life. It's something that is done by life, by self-reflective life. It's something that happens now. It doesn't happen in time. It's not developing over time. It creates time. It is the foundation of time. It's what we call time. That's the cognitive Big Bang. And indeed, it has created the whole universe, the galaxies. It has created prehistory and history. All of it exists within the cognitive Big Bang of the now, because there's nothing else. There is nothing else except what your mind does. And we model it, and we give it a little name, T, and we put it in scientific equations. It's all valid, but we are modeling the inner working of mind. It's valid modeling, it's accurate modeling, highly predictive, but it's the modeling of a trick of mind. Now I'll try to tie the two things I just told you. Let's go back to the myths. The cognitive Big Bang is a singularity. It's a singularity of thought. It takes the essence of existence, the cosmic egg of the Hindu myth of Brahman hatching in primordial waters. That cosmic egg is the present moment, out of which everything is born, arises through this trick of cognition, through the cognitive Big Bang. And it is the moment when the consciousness that exists, that simply is, creates the universe by projection over a seemingly objective timeline. It is the moment when consciousness enters its own imagination and becomes subject to its constraints, the greatest of which is time. There are only two certainties in life, death and taxes. The idea of death is totally related to time. If there is no time, there is no birth, and there is no death. Right? So it is the creation of time that brings the substantiality of the world into existence, and that is creation. It is the Big Bang that created the universe. And maybe the scientific theory of the Big Bang is right on, but symbolically. It's a symbol of what's happening now. It's a mathematically coherent symbol of what's happening now. Creation in the form of a cognitive Big Bang.
How does this fit into the model?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. There are two questions. James is referring to my previous talk. I think several of you were not here like 1.5 hours ago. In my previous talk, the point I was making is that all of reality is mental, not only the past and the future. And he's asking me to relate what I just said to that. I'll answer this first before I go to your second question. The answer is simple. I just said that the past is clearly mental, the future is clearly mental, only the present stands a chance of not being mental, but it may be, but assume that it is not. It is infinitesimally small anyway. So the bulk of life is mental anyway. What we consider to be life is necessarily mental, even if there is a singular objectivity at the root of all this, in the form of this infinitesimally small present. That's how I would relate it. The second question had to do with biology. What's the relationship between mentality and the biological, physiological processes in the body? Because evoking memories can have an effect on the body, and things in the body can also evoke certain memories. There is a correlation between these two things. If I understood you correctly, that was the essence of the question. I'll go back to my previous talk to answer this. If you haven't attended it, I'll try to give you a brief explanation. My point in the previous talk was that everything is mental. There is no physical world outside consciousness, outside and independent of consciousness. And I tried to explain basic facts of reality, like the fact that we share the same world. If it's a dream, how come we are sharing the same dream, right? The fact that brain activity correlates with experience, and I'm saying that the brain doesn't generate experience, so how come brain activity correlates with experience, and a few other things. I explained it by saying that there's only one consciousness, and that living creatures are the extrinsic appearance, are the image of dissociative processes in this one consciousness, or what dissociative processes look like. A body like mine, is what the dissociation of universal consciousness that corresponds to my own private inner life looks like from your point of view. It isn't outside consciousness, it's an image in consciousness of a process also in consciousness. But consciousness can fragment into dissociated alters, and that's what creates the appearance of a physical world. That was my point in the last talk. So finally, to answer your question, if that is so, then the entire body is the image of dissociative mental processes, not only brain activity, right? Because there is only mind. So there's nothing else the body could be but the image of processes in mind. But only some of those dissociated processes are amenable to self-reflection. In other words, you're experiencing a lot of things in your alter, but you only know that you're experiencing some of them. Experience does not imply metacognition, does not imply self-reflection. You may experience things that you do not know that you are experiencing, but they are still being experienced, just not at the metacognitive level. I think the body is the image of these non-metacognitive experiences. Experiences that you are having, but you do not know that you are having. In Jungian terminology, that would be the personal unconscious. I don't like the word unconscious because I think it is in consciousness. It's just not accessible to introspection through self-reflection. So, of course, your body is directly connected to your mental activity because it is the image of mental activity in the same way that patterns of neuronal firings in your head are the image of self-reflective mental activity. We were talking during the break about Giulio Tononi's integrated information theory of consciousness, which is not a theory of consciousness at all. It's a gauge of self-reflection. It doesn't explain consciousness any more than a speedometer explains the movement of a car. It just measures an aspect of consciousness, namely self-reflection, which has to do with information integration. According to that theory, what he calls consciousness, and I would call self-reflection, looks like something in your brain. It looks like a closed process of information flow and integration in the brain. Other types of experience that are not self-reflective may look like something else. They may look like your liver, your stomach, your muscles, your heart, your thymus gland, well, you name it, your pituitary gland, whatever other glands you have. So that connection seems to be not only natural, but implied by this idea that everything is in mind. The body can only be an image in mind of a process in mind. So the fact that it correlates with the evocation power of memory is very natural.
Where's the mind when the body doesn't work?
Where is the mind when the body doesn't work anymore? So let's follow the logic of what I just explored. If the body is the image of a dissociative fragmentation process of mental contents in one mind, when you die and the body dissolves, what is it that ends? It's the dissociation. It's the dissociation that ends, because the body is the image of the dissociation. Regular brain activity is the image of the dissociation. So when you take psychedelics that put down your brain activity, that reduce your brain activity, you're reducing dissociation. So you gain now access to aspects of what's going on in mind that before you didn't have access to because you were dissociated from it. Suddenly you gain access to that because dissociation has been reduced. If you die, that's the permanent end not only of your egoic brain activity, but all mental activity related to this dissociative alter that we are, according to what I'm putting the idea and putting forward. So you just get reintegrated back in the next level. This next highest level may be universal consciousness itself. It may be.
If I resuscitate you,
If you resuscitate, what happens to your mind? We can argue about what is death and what is resuscitation, but
usually when I gain a level, I stay at that level, or when people resuscitate me, because I see the line.
people with dissociative conditions can slip back and forth into dissociation. The fact that dissociation reduces or ends doesn't preclude the possibility that it may reactivate and you may come back to it, so long as it's still viable. So you can transit between the states. I don't think it's a polemical claim that I'm making. What is polemical is my interpretation of that transit. I'm saying that the whole thing is mental. It doesn't have two aspects, a mental and a physical one. It's just mental. That's the polemical part. But that you can transit between them to some extent doesn't seem polemical. So your dissociation can decrease dramatically, as in cases of cardiac arrest, and then people have near-death experiences. They are reintegrated back. They see God. They are integrated in the whole, and they tell that in their own symbolic, idiosyncratic language. But the essence of it is always that of the end of a dissociation, an increase, an enlargement of your sense of self, of your sense of identity. If you read, I can give so many examples. Jill Bolte Taylor's book, Stroke of Insight. She had a stroke in her left brain hemisphere, and she described herself as a genie liberated from her bottle, as a great whale gliding in an ocean of silent euphoria. I quoted it exactly to you now. Clearly, the idea of a liberation, of an expansion of your sense of self, is consistent with the idea of a reduction of dissociative activity, dissociated activity, a reintegration of one's sense of self, a reintegration of memory and emotion. Anita Moorjani's near-death experience, he also talks about having never been so big, so powerful, so all-encompassing. I believe I quoted it word by word again. And she had that when she had a near-death experience as a result of stage 4 cancer.
Everything you're explaining now, you also have that when you're suffocating.
Everything I'm explaining now, you also have when you're suffocating. Correct. So children or teenagers playing the choking game, they suffocate themselves partially and intentionally in order to have this experience of an enlarged sense of self, a reduction of dissociation. There are many more examples.
Is your explanation that the consciousness that creates the brain?
Your help. Thanks. Now you set up the stage for me now beautifully. Let me repeat your question. So he's evoking Occam's razor, which is the idea that the best explanation is the most parsimonious one, in the sense that it's the one that requires the least number of new postulates. This is technical language to say that the best explanation is the simplest one. Okay, we just specify exactly what simplicity means according to Occam. And his question was, what is then the simplest explanation? It's just that your brain generates the mind, and then because you're suffocating or you're putting drugs in your brain, it changes your brain functioning, and therefore your mind also changes, or it's something more complex? I think it's something less complex, because the idea that the brain generates the mind requires, one, a brain outside mind. In other words, it requires an ontological class distinct from the only one that is given of existence, which is mentation itself. We infer that there exists something outside mentation, but that's not a direct data of experience. It's an intellectual inference. It's an explanatory model. It's a thought construct.
But why then aren't you solipsistic? I don't know the exact.
Okay. You're raising all the good questions. Let me just answer the first. These are all the good questions.
Are then explaining that there are more minds than just yours.
Yes. So I'm not a solipsist. I'm not claiming that I as a personal, as an individual, am dreaming the entire world up into existence, and that you don't really exist. You're just figments of my imagination. There's nothing it's like to be you. You do not have inner life. You only exist insofar as what I can perceive. That's solipsism. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you all have inner lives. I believe that you all have inner lives, that there is something it is like to be each one of you, that you have emotions, that you have experiences, and that you interact with me in the context of a single shared world. Okay? I grant all this. Therefore, I am not a solipsist. I am an idealist, which is very different from solipsism. So I'll go back to your first question. What is the simplest explanation for experiences of self-transcendence associated with brain function impairment, which is what we are exploring now? I took a total divergent direction from my original talk, but it's fine. Let's explore that. The physicalist explanation, the mainstream explanation, is that there exists stuff outside mind. That is an inference of thought. All you know is mind. To know is to have in mind. Okay? Mind entails the qualities of experience. Something outside mind has no qualities. It only has structure and quantities. And it exists, insofar as we can know, it exists only as abstraction, as explanatory models, as things that you say, experience behaves as if there were an abstract world outside mind that is modulating experience. That's physicalism. So physicalism requires an ontological class, a type of stuff that is fundamentally distinct from what you know, and what you know is mind. So you have to posit something else beyond your experience. That's physicalism. And then you try to explain your experience in terms of that inference. And that's where it goes wrong with physicalism, because it's impossible to deduce the qualities of experience based on abstract physical arrangements. There is nothing about the speed, momentum, charge, or mass of subatomic particles in terms of which we could deduce what it feels like to see red, what it feels like to be angry, what it feels like to fall in love. These are completely distinct ontological classes, and the lack of a bridge between them is called the explanatory gap, or the hard problem of consciousness in philosophy. But let's even leave that aside for now. Let's even pretend that physicalism were a complete explanation for life, which it isn't. But let's pretend it were. Let's pretend that there were no hard problem of consciousness, no explanatory gap. Idealism would still be the most parsimonious, because the most economical, the simplest, because it posits that existence consists of exactly what is given, mentation, mind, which is what you have known since you're born, and it's the only thing you will ever know until you die. You will never know anything outside mind, because anything touched by the tip of the wand of knowledge, doesn't matter how lightly, is already mental. The only challenge for idealism, for this notion that all of reality is mental, is a challenge of explanatory power. Because idealism postulates less, it infers less. It doesn't infer all this shadow universe of pure abstraction outside mind. It doesn't infer any of that. So it has less tools to explain reality, less degrees of freedom. So the challenge for what I'm saying is, can we explain reality without postulating a physical world? That is the correct way to frame the question. And the body of my work is an attempt to do exactly that. And just to give you a general brushstroke, my postulate is that the only ontological primitive is universal mind, unbound spatially. In other words, mind that permeates everything, and that existence are patterns of excitation of that mind. And that individual psyches, such as our own, arise out of a very natural process of dissociation in universal mind, the image of which is a biological body, a living body. So, a living body is the image of dissociative processes in universal consciousness, some of which are self-reflective. That's your egoic mental activity, the stuff that you're not only experiencing, but you know that you are experiencing it. That's metacognition, which psychedelics tend to sort of dissolve. They bring you back to the flow of the Tao, which is non-self-reflective experience. But within the dissociation, there is also non-self-reflective experience, which is happening, but you don't know that you're experiencing them. And a partial image of that may be your physical body. And that goes a long way in making sense of the mind-body connection, the placebo effect, the relationship between physiology and memory, and all that good stuff that consists in mysteries according to the mainstream physicalist worldview. Your questions are good. They're the right questions. We will not have time here to explore this rigorously. I just wanted to give you a sense that I have thought about this rigorously, even if I'm not saying everything I have to say. Okay? Anything else? I always get this question. It's such a natural question. The question is, why would the universal mind dissociate itself? And implicit in the question is the assumption that it can make a self-reflective choice. In other words, I could rephrase your question or paraphrase your question by saying, why did universal mind, in God's name, choose to dissociate itself in these little alters here so prone to suffering and we're all going to die? Why did it do that? You see, the faulty assumption behind the question is one of anthropomorphization. It's to project onto the whole of universal mind certain cognitive properties that belong to alters, to dissociated alters like ourselves, to living beings. I think that, for instance, self-reflection, the ability to think about thoughts, the ability to ponder our own experiences, is unique to alters, is unique to dissociation. The same process that creates a dissociation creates this folding in of consciousness upon itself that allows for metacognition, for self-reflection, for cognitive re-representation, to use the words of Schooler in his famous 2002 paper. In which he explained that there could be unconsciousness, there could be experience, and there could be re-representation, experience that is aware of itself. I don't think universal mind, before it dissociated into alters, had self-reflection, had metacognition. It didn't proceed in the form of a conscious, self-reflective choice, like, okay, now I'm going to break myself up and blow myself up into bits of dissociated alters, and I'm going to go through all this difficult experience of life, all these wonders and all this suffering, and see what happens. I don't think it went like that. I think at a universal level, before dissociation, there was only experience, maybe not even cognition, let alone metacognition. And what unfolded was a natural reflection of natural law. Even if this natural law is mental, it doesn't contradict naturalism. To speak the word or the language of psychology and relate that to naturalism, we could say that what universal mind did and the way it evolved was a consequence of its built-in archetypes, its own psychological archetypes at a universal level, which you may relate that to Plato's forms, the idea that there are some basic templates according to which mind flows, the templates of the Tao in Chinese philosophy. I think dissociation is a very natural consequence of the flow of the Tao. It's not a self-reflective, free-willed choice. It goes like the way your dreams go. In your dreams, you're not making choices and thinking, where did I come from, where I'm going? The thing just flows. And dissociation clearly is an archetypal manifestation, if what I'm saying is correct. It may not be, but I think it is. So he's saying, if all is oneness, then in the form of oneness, the one cannot experience itself unless it breaks itself up into alters. So you're bringing a teleological spin to this. You're basically saying there was a motivation, there was an intent, there was a plan. There may have been, I don't deny that. My point is, we don't need it to be the case in order for what I'm saying to make sense. You understand what I mean? It may have been the case, but we don't need it to have been the case for this idea of idealism to make sense and to be coherent and empirically sound. We do not need that. That said, it may have been the case. I don't know. Sometimes I am in a funny state of mind and I think, darn, yeah, it was the case. And other times I'm more grounded and I think, I don't want to go there, I don't want to go there. I have a solid story, I'll stick to the parameters of this story. Anything else? He raised his hands first. Oh, do I believe that people can arrive at these insights or at this opinion by themselves without my telling them? Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll tell you exactly what I do. I don't think I can convince anybody that I'm right who hasn't already know it by themselves. All they need, all people need, I needed it. That's why I'm doing this, because I wish somebody had done this to me. All they need is an echo. All they need is validation. They need somebody to be saying the same thing and articulating it in a coherent, rational, empirically grounded way, so they take seriously what they already know. People who don't already know what I'm saying will think I'm a bullshitter. They will think I'm some kind of a new age crank. And many do. And then when they try to debate me, then they maybe change their opinion. But I have had neo-atheists and famous militant materialists go after me. And, Jerry Coyne and Steven Novella. Michael Shermer once didn't even open his mouth when we were supposed to be interacting on stage in a conference. Leonard Mlodinov. I mean, these engagements happen. Do I think that I'll change their minds? No, they are committed. They haven't had the insights. I will never get through to them. When I'm, quote, fighting them in a friendly way, I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing this for the audience. Because a lot of people in the audience don't take seriously what they really, really know if they would listen to their intuition. Because these guys come across to the culture as the guardians of reason. And what they are saying contradicts what people think they know. And you become sort of, not ashamed, but you become shy within yourself about what you sense, about what your intuition is telling you, and you start censoring yourself and say, I'm full of shit, it must be something else. So what I'm doing is not really to change the minds of anybody who doesn't already know what I'm saying. I don't have any hope to reach people who don't already know what I'm saying. I'm counting on people already knowing what I'm saying, and I only want to give them an echo, a resonance, a validation, so they take themselves seriously. Yeah. So the question is, okay, there is my personal psyche, my individual consciousness as a human being, and there is universal consciousness. And while we are alive, we are this individual psyche, and then if we die, we become maybe universal consciousness again, or something in between, because the whole thing may happen through hierarchical steps of structuring. What's the relationship between my sense of self, my I, my mind now, and universal consciousness? Is that your question? So I gave you a brief answer in the interval. I can explore more that now. My brief answer was, it's exactly the same thing. There's no difference. What is... Okay. What do I base this on? It is an integral part of, technically it's called an ontology, a world view of the nature of being. What I'm putting forward to you is an ontology. It's an integral part of my ontology, that there is only one ontological primitive, only one thing that really exists, and that's universal consciousness. And you're just a dissociated aspect of it. Therefore, the only thing that exists in you is that same universal consciousness. Therefore, you are it. You are just a configuration of it, a particular thought structure in it that you identify yourself with. Can we be just part of it instead of being it? This is a language question. It's not really... it's very delicate, because whatever I say now runs the risk of being misinterpreted. Let me put it this way. Let's go back to the cosmic Big Bang. Let me try to link back to what my talk actually was about. Before we project our experiences of the now into this timeline of past and future, remember I was talking about the past being mental, a story in mind, the future being an expectation in mind, the present being infinitesimally small, right? Now, the you that you're referring to, this person, which has a personal history, you have been born, your parents are called this and that, you studied this and that, and you had your first kiss at whatever age, and you have a personal history. That's the past, so that's mental. It's a story in mind. And your identity has also to do with tendencies. Basically, what we call personality is a set of tendencies, a proclivity to act and react in a certain way. Your goals, your objectives, how you react to what people say, how you behave in certain situations. Those are tendencies, proclivities. They belong to the future. Therefore, they are also mental. They are a story in your mind. And the present is infinitely small. So this individual you that is asking the question is a narrative. It's a story in mind. Your real self is the thing that is creating that story and telling that story and believing that story. And that real you is universal consciousness. Because it's the same that is creating the story in me, that sense of I. What is the self? The self, let me speak technically for a moment. I still didn't finish the answer. I'll get there. I'll say something technical and then I will translate. But I want to ground it, even for myself, in technical words. Experience implies an experiencer. Not necessarily something different from experience. Let me be specific. Experience implies or entails a certain point of view coupled to a field of qualities. Every experience has a certain point of view from which it is experienced, right? I will call that point of view attached to a field of qualities, and I'm using, for the philosophers amongst you, I'm using Coleman's definition of self. That point of view is the self. It is the only self that really exists. Everything else is a story that the self creates. So you tell yourself that I am this guy with this name, dressing this clothes, being born at that time, who has these goals in life, who intends to do this and that, who wants to marry that girl. Past and future, narratives, mental stories. The self is the point of view that is witnessing these stories being created and believed in. Okay? If that is the only self there is, it's the same in you, in me, in everybody else, and in nature at large. That self is universal consciousness. It's just that the stories it tells become dissociated from each other. So I'm telling certain stories that you're dissociated from. So you don't feel that you are Bernardo Kastrup. Bernardo Kastrup has his own stories. You have your own stories that are dissociated from mine. But the I behind the stories, that innate sense of I that a child would have, that a baby, a newborn would have, before it's told anything about how the world works, before concepts start permeating its mind and the narratives begin, that primary sense of I is the same as in you and in me. It cannot be any different because it's not colored by narratives. Do I believe? Do I believe in the soul? It's an overloaded word, but I'll try to honor the intuition of the word, and I'll say, yes, I believe in the soul. But I don't think the soul is in my body or inside space-time. I think the soul is that within which my world happens. I think my body is inside my soul, not my soul inside my body. I think my world exists inside my soul. So I will never measure or find my soul in the world for the same reason that a dreaming man will never find his body inside his dream. What would be the relationship between soul and consciousness? Now I know where you're coming from. I understand you. So I will answer the question you didn't ask yet, but I think you're trying to ask. If we are no longer in the form of a human being, in other words, if dissociation ends, we die. Is there still a sense of individuality? Is there any individuality preserved after bodily death? Or do we just reintegrate into the total universal consciousness and there is no individuality to talk about anymore? I think that's the core of your question. Is there an individual soul that persists? I do not know. I do not know, because that requires that we understand universal structures that we may have no access to. All I can say is that I don't see extremely strong evidence that individuality remains. There is some evidence in the form of near-death experience reports. There seems to be some aspect of individuality that remains. It may not be total. In other words, one level higher in the hierarchy of being, maybe you and him are the same soul. And one level higher than that, different souls at the first level are again the same meta-soul. And one level higher than that, there is a meta-meta soul which divides itself up into meta-souls at one level below. And you go through that hierarchy until you find universal consciousness fully integrated. It could be like that. I don't know. Do I see strong evidence for that? No. No. And to be honest, I'm not worried about that. Whether some individuality is preserved or not, individuality is not what I am. Bernardo Castro is a story in my mind and in your mind. It's not really a fundamental existent, if you know what I mean. It's a configuration of the one fundamental existent. So am I too worried about the preservation of my individuality? No, as a matter of fact, I hope it's not preserved. There's a lot of pain and suffering associated with this shit. I hope that, you know, if I had a preference, well, let me be very honest with you. My preference would be that physical is more true, because it gives you a guaranteed end for all of your problems and all of your suffering. It is going to end. There will be eternal rest. Boy, this is so liberating. I used to be a physicalist. I mean, my background is artificial intelligence, computer engineering. That's what I have my PhD, reconfigurable computing. I have always studied philosophy all my life. But I come from a hardcore, I mean, I used to work at CERN in Switzerland, the big accelerator laboratory, the cathedral of physicalism in the world. I come from a very hardcore background that in my youth was very liberating, freeing for me. And once that cathedral got dismantled because of the hard problem of consciousness, that once I had an insight, there's no way physicalism can be true. First I had a depression, and then I started thinking about alternatives, and I came to this now. And my feeling about this position I'm conveying to you, I'll be very frank with you. I suffer from the vertigo of eternity. I don't know whether you have had that experience. When the story of you disappears, I mean, you guys call it ego dissolution. It happens often during a psychedelic trance if you do it intensely enough. That vertigo of the dissolution of a personal self, of a sense of individuality, and the idea that there is eternity. It's like free fall, and you have nothing to grasp on. It's never going to end. And you are alone, because you're the only thing that's going on. There's nothing else but the real you. And I'm not too fond of that. I'm not in peace with that. My commitment to this comes out of a commitment to truth, not out of a commitment to well-being. But that may be just me, because most people I know who adopt this point of view I'm conveying to you think that this is great, that is freeing, that this is liberating. All these spiritual teachers and people on a spiritual path, they want to understand this, they want to feel that this is true, and they think this will lead to great liberation, and to many of them it seems to. I envy all that. The idea, his comment is, even the idea of being alone is a conceptualization. Correct. Yeah, I meant it as a direct experience, not as a conceptualization. I meant it as what Buddhists would call the great dark void, which is the ground of all being. And that experience, if you validate, I mean, it's one thing when you experience that and you come back and you tell yourself, just hallucinated. It's another thing when you experience that and you come back and it matches with your best theory of reality and you take it seriously. Try that. In the level of? Do I believe that consciousness exists at a subatomic level? That you're referring to panpsychism, which is the theory that consciousness is fundamental. In other words, it's not created by material arrangements. It's inherent to matter. It's a property of matter, just like mass, charge, momentum are properties of matter. So you can't reduce it, but it is still encompassed by material structures. In other words, although consciousness is fundamental under panpsychism, it is bounded by material structures. So there is something other than consciousness that bounds consciousness. So consciousness, for instance, may be bound at the boundaries of an electron or another subatomic particle. It's fundamentally, but bound by physical structure. What I'm saying, so under panpsychism, everything is conscious, right? What I'm saying is different. What I'm saying is not that everything is conscious. What I'm saying is that everything is in consciousness. In my position, What we call the physical world is encompassed by consciousness. It doesn't encompass consciousness, as in panpsychism. Panpsychism would say physical structures encompass consciousness, even though consciousness is fundamentally irreducible. What I'm saying is that physical structures are encompassed by consciousness in the same way that ripples are encompassed by water. Consciousness is the water. What appears in the screen of perception, which is the material world, are ripples of consciousness, excitations of consciousness. You could even apply the same mathematical formalism in quantum field theory, because quantum field theory would say that everything is an excitation of the quantum vacuum, or M theory would say that everything is an excitation of a hyperdimensional brain. You can even transport those mathematical formalisms to the idea I'm putting forward, except that the ontological primitive here is not an object, but the subject, the experiencer, that which experiences, the point of view coupled to the field of qualities. So I don't believe in panpsychism. I don't think an electron is conscious. I think the error panpsychists make is to look at ripples in water and say that water is made of ripples. It is not. Ripples are the discernible patterns of the excitations of water. Subatomic particles are the discernible patterns of the excitations of consciousness. Consciousness is not made of subatomic particles, even if it's irreducible. It's not composed out of little consciousnesses in subatomic particles, for the same reason that water is not made of ripples. Could you follow me? Oh, no. Let me qualify this. The question is, ultimately what it's trying to get to is, does consciousness exist at the level of subatomic particles? I can interpret the questions in two ways and give two different answers. I'll interpret it in one way and give you one answer, to give you an example. Yes, consciousness exists at the level of subatomic particles, for the same reason that water exists at the level of the smallest discernible ripples. Subatomic particles are the image of excitations of consciousness. So consciousness exists at the level of subatomic particles. Now interpret the question in another way. Is there something it is like to be a subatomic particle? No. I don't think there is anything it is like to be a subatomic particle. In other words, a subatomic particle is not a dissociated alter of universal consciousness in the way that you and I are. You and I have dissociated private inner lives. I don't think a subatomic particle has dissociated private inner life. I think it's just a pixel in the extrinsic image of the non-dissociated parts of universal consciousness. In other words, the fact that we delineate a subatomic particle and call it a thing is a construct of thought. It is not real. In nature, there are no independent subatomic particles. There is just the inanimate universe as one whole. There's a field in philosophy called mereology, which is the study of sets and subsets, parts and wholes. And there is a very good argument today, I forgot the name of the guy who wrote the paper, there's a very good argument that the inanimate universe cannot be considered to have proper parts. It can only be looked upon as one entire whole. And arguments for this include, for instance, I'm getting a little technical here, but hopefully I'll translate this enough for you guys to follow me. John von Neumann, back in the 30s, he had a mathematical treatment. Well, he wrote a book with a mathematical treatment of quantum mechanics, in which he basically showed that nothing ever makes a measurement. When things interact, they just become entangled. Never a measurement is done. There's never collapse. Yet we experience collapse because we are dissociated alters. So the argument is that the inanimate world has no observers. It's only one entangled whole without proper parts. Subatomic particles are an arbitrary delineation of the inanimate universe, in the same way that it's arbitrary to say that the handle of a mug is different from the mug. The handle and the mug are one thing, but the handle is still cognitively salient. We can point at it and say, oh, look, that's a handle. And then at an epistemic level, at the level of thought, we treat the handle as a separate entity, but that has no actual reality in the world out there. The same thing for a car. You may say, well, a car is a thing in itself. It's not. It only works if there is the environment, air, to allow for combustion, if there is a road underneath its tires to allow for grip, if there is the gravity of the earth to pull the car down for grip to happen. It's completely arbitrary to delineate a subset of the inanimate world and call it a thing. It's like tracing figures on tree bark or finding faces in clouds. It has no reality. That's why I'm saying that at the level of subatomic particles, you can't say that there is something it is like to be a subatomic particle, because there isn't such a thing as a subatomic particle to begin with. It's a pixel of a broader image. The smile of the Mona Lisa is not a thing in itself, it's a part of a painting that should be seen as a whole. Subatomic particles are just like that. We conveniently separate them and treat them as things, but this has no reality. You have to see the entire universe as a whole. And then, is there something it is like to be the entire inanimate universe as a whole? Yes, I think there is cosmic inner life. There is universal inner life, the extrinsic appearance of which is the inanimate universe. In exactly the same way that your brain activity is the extrinsic appearance of your egoic inner life. Exactly the same way. So the inanimate universe is the scan of God's brain, if you wish. I'll give a couple of other people a chance before I come back to you.
So you said there's no observer, so how would you explain the double slit?
Yes, so the question is, I said there is no observers, so how do I explain the double slit experiment? Let me let me make very clear what I mean. I think there are no inanimate observers. No tabletop measurement apparatus is an actual physical system, and therefore it cannot be an observer. But human beings are dissociated alters of universal consciousness, and dissociation creates a boundary, a Markov blanket in the activity of universal consciousness, and creates a differentiation between observed and observed, observer and observed. So I think conscious beings are observers. They are valid observers. The interaction between our thoughts and Psy, the wave function of the world, does lead to a measurement and creates the world of our experience. My position is only that there are no inanimate observers. Only the inanimate universe as a whole can be considered a proper physical system, and therefore a potential observer and observed. Yeah? You had a question from this side? You were the first to raise your hand, yeah.
I have a question. Will never be on Earth.
I already know where you're going, yeah.
What
Yeah.
happens then?
So the question is, I'm maintaining that we are dissociated complexities of universal mind, but for us to arise, we need to be born. You know, two other people have to have sex for us to pop into this world. And it seems to be like that for biology in general. Biology arises out of living things. And her question is, suppose that there's no other life in the universe, only on Earth, and then we destroy the planet, biology ends, would dissociation end? The question you're asking is touching on the subject of abiogenesis, the rise of life from non-life, which we today do not understand. All the instances of life we know have arisen out of pre-existing life. We have not yet managed to create life out of non-life. And, even the work that has recently been done about writing DNA from scratch and replacing the DNA of a cell with DNA written by a computer and the cell is still living, even that is not abiogenesis. It's just reprogramming of existing life. You reprogram the DNA, but you started from a living cell. Abiogenesis is one of the greatest mysteries we have today. How did life arise for the first time? And in the framework of what I'm describing, I can rephrase the exact same question in different words and say, how did the first dissociation arise in universal mind? We know that dissociated alters can create other dissociated alters by creating the exact right conditions for the arisal of another alter. But we do not know how an alter creates out of non-alters. So I don't have the answer to that either. I'm putting forward an ontology, an interpretation of science. I'm not putting forward a new scientific theory. So I'm as looking forward to understanding abiogenesis as you are. Clearly, abiogenesis happened. We may not understand how or what led to it, but it did happen because life as we know it could not have existed in earlier stages of the universe before stars formed, before the first supernovae exploded to create rocky planets and second generations of stars. So it could not have existed. So it happened. I don't know how. It's not like the soul is leaving the body. It's like the dreamer waking up. What you are is whatever is dreaming this up. It's not solipsism. This is a collective shared dream. To die is to wake up from that dream. The dream was within that which woke up. That which woke up was not in the dream. It's the other way around. Okay? So I don't think there is an immaterial soul that leaves the physical body, looks for another one, and enters another physical body. I don't believe that. Do I believe that the soul can dream again? You bet. Yes, I think the soul can dream again. And in that sense, I believe in, quote, reincarnation. I'll go back to him because he raised his hand before.
You told us your theory was empirically correct. Where's the empirical evidence of the research paper about the universal consciousness that I can read?
Yes. So the question is, I claim that my theory is empirically correct. In other words, that it is consistent with observations. And he asked, where is the paper that shows the evidence? Remember that I'm putting forward an ontology, not a predictive scientific model. I'm not doing new science. I am interpreting science. So my starting point is validated science. And then I put forward an ontological interpretation of that. So the falsifiability involved here is different than Popper's classical falsifiability for scientific theories, like psychoanalysis. What is involved here is, one, my interpretation has to have the same or more explanatory power than the alternative. It has to make equally sense of what is observed and known to be true, as the alternative, perhaps more sense. Perhaps it should explain more things. That's one. Two, it should be logically consistent internally. It shouldn't contradict itself. Three, it should be parsimonious. Hopefully more parsimonious than alternative. In other words, to explain everything that physicalism already explains, maybe explain a little more, and explain that making less postulates. These are the key criteria for an ontology. Even if you have no empirical way to falsify one of the alternatives, one of the ontologies, even without that direct empirical validation, you can still choose for the best ontology based on explanatory power, parsimony, and internal consistency. That said, there is plenty of empirical evidence. In physics, in quantum physics, I was avoiding this word because it gets immediately conflated with New Age nonsense. You know, the word quantum, oh, there comes woo. So let me try to be as precise as possible. Quantum theory has two counterintuitive predictions built into the theory. One is non-locality, the other one is contextuality. Let's forget about non-locality. New Age makes a lot of non-locality. I want nothing to do with that. It's not my thing. I don't think it's relevant. Let's look at contextuality. Contextuality is a prediction of quantum theory that basically says it is impossible for the qualities that you observe to have existed before you observed them. And there are very good statistical arguments why it is impossible.
Like when I study philosophy, like reality doesn't exist. I think I will win the argument.
No, I think you will lose the argument. Because no, it's your interpretation. Okay, his question is, if I say that reality doesn't exist, which I didn't say, but if I had said that, no, not even more or less, I didn't say that at all. It's your interpretation of what I said. If you go to the train track and wait for the train to come, let's see who is right. I didn't say that reality doesn't exist. I didn't say that reality was unnatural. I said that it was mental. Qualities such as concreteness, solidity. You know, a train comes, and it has inertia. It is solid. It's going to smash into you. These are felt qualities. You know, when Johnson kicked that rock and said, I refute Berkeley dust, and he kicked the rock, he was appealing to a quality of experience, the quality of concreteness and solidity. The physical world of physicalists has no qualities. It has no solidity. You asked two questions before I could even answer. Let me answer the two questions and then you continue. It has no solidity. It has no concreteness. It's pure abstraction supposed to explain the felt solidity and the felt concreteness. If I go to a train track as an idealist, the train comes, it will smash into me, I will become an entropic soup, and my dissociation will end, and my mind will reintegrate into a broader context. Bernardo Kastrup will die. I'm not saying that reality doesn't exist. I'm not saying that reality is an illusion. I'm saying that it is mental. Yet it obeys very stable patterns and regularities called the laws of physics that we cannot change by an exercise of our volition because we are dissociated from the mental processes behind it. If I go to the train track and the train smashes into me, I am toast, as Bernardo Kastrup. The story of me is gone. None of that defeats idealism for the same reason that Johnson kicking that rock doesn't defeat idealism, it corroborates it. Let me go back to your first question, which I actually already forgot. The empirical evidence. Contextuality in quantum physics basically means the following. Quantum physics predicts that if I look at a system from a certain angle in a certain way, I will measure A. If I look at the system from another angle and measure it in another way, I will get B. And we can prove that A contradicts B if you assume that whatever you observed existed before you observed it. Not polemical what I'm telling you. This is accepted. Contextuality is a prediction of quantum mechanics that a lot of people... Let me close my story and then I'll go back. Contextuality contradicts realism. The idea that there is a reality outside of perception, observation. It contradicts it. That's why a lot of physicists did not believe contextuality was a correct prediction. And people were working very hard in so-called non-local hidden variables theories for decades because they thought that couldn't be the case. Guess what? Since 2007, there have been 2 or 3 hardcore, undeniable confirmations of contextuality. The world is contextual. That means it does not exist independently, outside of observation. It is astonishing that this is not discussed in the culture at large. It's because it's so highly technical that people find a nice excuse not to talk about it. But realism, this idea that reality is out there, independent of our minds, is toast. This is gone. To salvage this, you have to come up with some explanations that would make Ockham turn on his grave. Some postulates about signals coming back from the future and all kinds of crazy stuff and hidden variables that are completely unnecessary for predictive purposes and for which we have no evidence of their existence. Mathematical acrobatics that nobody has managed to close so far.
There is also no mathematical evidence or evidence of the universal quantities.
Okay, so I answered your first question. You asked me, is there empirical evidence for my position? I just told you I can give you a list of papers with empirical evidence out of laboratory experiments. I can also point you to a pattern that consistently associates impairment of brain function with an expansion of your sense of self, which is consistent with idealism and contradicts physicalism. So there is plenty of empirical evidence, even though I do not need empirical evidence because this is an ontology discussion, not a Popperian scientific discussion about falsifiability. So I answered all that. So what you're saying now is there is no mathematical evidence for universal consciousness. Evidence for universal consciousness is everywhere. I would tell you that there is nothing that is not evidence of universal consciousness. Nothing. Me, distant, you. If you truly understand what I'm trying to say, you see what I'm saying now. None of this is evidence for physicalism because it's fine to disagree. my point is none of this is evidence for physicalism, because all of this, insofar as you can know, consists of qualities of experience. Physicalism requires something beyond the qualities of experience, an abstraction of thought, an explanatory model out of which we hope to make sense of the patterns and regularities of this. You're only justified to make that step if you cannot explain the patterns and regularities of this without that step. That's Occam's razor that you appealed to. According to Occam's razor, physicalism is only justified if there isn't a more parsimonious alternative. And my position is that there is. I'll answer only this question because I need to go. I'm well over my time. Nothing in what I'm saying contradicts any of the naturalistic reasons for the emergence of complexity that hold under physicalism. To say that everything is in mind does not invalidate any of the rationale for the emergence of complexity that we understand already today. I need to leave it here because we have the next speaker comes. I hope you guys all stay because this is a good guy. Thank you.